Even when Krychek wins, he still loses. My name is Zachary Conan, and if you like my content, if you like this video, please show that you like it by clicking that like button, and also, if you're not subscribed yet, at least consider doing so. We'd like to cover some important episodes of X-Files Mythology, and today we're covering the episodes Tunguska and Terma, both named after specific places, one in Russia and one in North Dakota. Was that it?
Yes.
And these are episodes 8 and 9 from the 4th season of the X-Files. And it can be viewed as a direct continuation of what I call the Venomized Krychek saga, which was Piper, Maru, and Apocrypha. And Piper, Maru, and Apocrypha are actually two of my favorite X-Files episodes. Those are really, really great. Tunguska and Terma are definitely not up to that same level of quality, but there's a lot of interesting and fascinating things in it, as well as quite a few things that simply don't add up as well. But we're going to jump into it. Basically, what you need to know about this episode, if I could just explain it briefly, is that this is Knucklehead Krychek's master plan, really. So Krychek has been at work with the Russians, working on an inoculation, an antidote to the black cancer, as the Russians call it, or the black oil as we know it, or the purity virus as we'll come to know it. Mm. And he's been working on developing a vaccine or inoculation for it, and so have the syndicate over in the States with some old people, with some elderly citizens. And Krychek, part of his plan is to hire a Russian assassin to go and impede the progress of the syndicate, of the cigarette-smoking man and the well-manicured man, and basically kill all of these elderly people, all the people who are working on the inoculation, all the people involved, and come back so that Krychek could kind of secure his chance to develop a cure for the purity virus and sell it or use it as power, because Krychek, his truth is power. Truth is a very important part of the X-Files, and for Krychek, truth is power, however he can find it. Only things don't go quite as well for Krychek. During his masquerade, his madman's plot, he is discovered by a group of refugees from the experimental test subject prisoners camp, essentially. And so far as they know, the only way to stop the experimentations with black oil is to cut off your left arm, is to sever your left arm. Mm-hmm. And I think it was brilliantly captured, because it took me a little bit to notice it the first time I saw this episode. I've seen it multiple times since then, but none of the refugees have these left arms, and they all come up to Krychek, and Krychek has to act as if he's one of them, because if they found out that he was actually one of their villains, one of the people who's been oppressing them and basically committing acts against humanity against them, they would definitely execute him in a second. And they think that they're helping him. They honestly do, and they sever his arm as he's screaming. And he has a prosthetic left arm from now on, mm-hmm. and truly becomes that nearly comical ideal of a supervillain. Only it's Chris Carter writing this character, and the wonderful Nicholas Lea acting out the part, and It works wonders, and it's very cinematic and very cool. But that's basically the overall plot when boiled down to its essential twists and turns. This one is particularly convoluted, though, and I really gave you the cliff notes if you're just a Krychek fan like I am. So, David, what did you think of these two episodes? It took me 4 minutes just to explain what Krychek was doing, what one character did.
Yeah, there was a lot going on.
Jesus.
So the episodes were very captivating, and also they were entertaining. I really enjoyed the fact that, it kind of did keep me on the edge of my seat. I didn't even want to look at my phone or anything, because I felt like I was going to miss something, and so I was just fixated on the plot and what was basically being divulged. And so basically it's this black oil substance all over again. And this time, the black oil substance, because it's been established that it already had sentience, has now morphed and changed.
Yeah.
So now it doesn't do the radiation burns on its victims. Instead, now it has a kind of a different impact on the humans it affects, basically.
Yeah, it's even evolved into like new forms and characteristics, almost leech-like.
Yeah, it's less detrimental to the host.
Yes.
And that seems to be to its benefit, so that way it can proliferate even more.
The question is it less detrimental to the host because of the experiments that have been going on in the background to kind of dilute this virus by people like Krychek and the Syndicate? That's an unanswered question, but it is a possible, at least explanation, an explanation hope, to make it make sense.
Yeah, there's a lot of seemingly contradictions on the surface of this series and the black oil substance and what it really does and what it really is, but the idea that it is a sentient being and it does have its own goals and purposes is enough, at least for me, to suspend belief.
Absolutely.
Right. And because of that sentience factor, it does have its own purposes, and those purposes can change because of the sentient factor. So that's not something that I'm too stuck on. Right.
Right.
So I'm not really stuck on just about anything. Honestly, I feel like it was a really good continuation because it did the events that happened within these episodes did follow up on my previous analysis about the black oil substance being a part of that Unit 731 war crime atrocity.
I think this one's even more overtly political and overtly metaphorical.
Yeah, because there's also the court.
The first one, I was more focused on the emotional, symbolism involved, and this one I feel is saying a lot more about history, about the actual crimes against humanity that have been committed by America, actually.
Mm-hmm. And one such example regarding the Unit 731 war crime is that it turns out the United States was involved in that and had allowed some of the scientists who did these horrible experiments on people, they allowed them immunity within the United States. And in agreements with these scientists to get that experimental data, really, for the United States' own purposes. And so that's really messed up that the United States government had done that. Whereas even the Russian government, who was overseeing some of the war crimes, they actually did hold war crime trials. So despite the fact that this is a Soviet communist Russia in the 1950s, they still had war crime trials in place to hold these scientists to justice.
And there are people who just refuse to believe that. That's why I think that, while Chris Carter may openly entertain the idea of extraterrestrial life, I think that what he was actually doing in the second part, in Terma, which starts with the Galileo quote. It's in Latin, and I forgot the exact Latin, but it simply means, and yet it moves. Mm-hmm. I think that what he's actually saying in that episode, because that one starts off beautifully with Mulder speaking with a test subject through a wall who has been contemplating suicide, and it's a scene full of pathos, and it's actually really pitiable, and it's very sad and easy to feel, and it goes along to what David was saying, or it speaks to what he was getting at. And I think that when Mulder is in the courtroom, and it's almost an eye-rolling moment of him being like, how much evidence do you need for aliens? I think what Chris Carter is actually saying is how much more evidence do you need for not the conspiracy theories, but the crimes that are right in front of you, that you could just open up any history book and actually find out that we don't even have to worry about the man behind the curtain or little green men, where there are enough horrors and evils right there in front of you in a business suit with immunity. So I think that's why maybe Chris Carter was maybe responding to ideas of well, these things could never happen. And he's like, well, no, these are actually documented things that did happen. So you tell me it doesn't happen, but there's so much evidence, and yet it moves. Yeah. You tell me it doesn't happen, and yet it moves. I think that's really what he was getting at with the second episode.
Exactly, and that quote was really a driving point for that as well, because that was included, and it was on purpose, and in the ethos of Galileo Galilei and what he did, he was talking about the moon and how the moon actually moves, and he's going against this prevailing idea in the Enlightenment against this geocentric, Earth-centric solar system model, right? Yeah. And so that's just what's beautiful about that is how that ties into this particular plot point here and how the evidence, at least for these war crimes happening all over the world.
Really quick, I think Chris Carter drives that home with like almost juxtaposes that kind of eye-rolling scene of like, ugh, Mulder making a speech, but I think that it's for metaphorical purposes, and he juxtaposes that immediately with one of the, I think, more damaging aspects of Krychek's plan was the fact that he radicalized, like, basically redneck, like, hillbilly, anti-government anarchists, I guess. Remember? He radicalized them into believing that black oil was used in all sorts of warfare, that the government is the absolute worst thing in the world. And Chris Carter is also showing how easily you can radicalize uneducated people with a lot of firearms and a criminal record. And that's also quite devious as well.
Mm-hmm. Man, there's just a lot more to go. So then you have that, and then you have, like, let's just say that, this is an invading alien species going to Earth through perhaps Mars, since they said that there were Martian rocks, and that's what they were the geologist was cutting through before he was infected in the laboratory, right? So at least we have that link there. But yeah, that can be carried forward and saying, that there's probably some plot or something where the aliens are planning to invade, or because this seems to be their interest, right? They are body swapping, they're trying to kill others, they're trying to get more people infected, right? And that just seems to be like connecting the logical dots here. So maybe I'm wrong. Maybe, if I watch more of the X-Files, that's not the case, but it does seem to be the case, at the least for now. And so I'm going to go from there, and I'm going to, kind of go forward.
And as someone who has watched the X-Files, all of it, you are not far off.
Good. So I know that at the very least that they're trying to infect other people and colonize and create these alien-human hybrids for their own purposes, which remain to be seen because, I don't know, it's mysterious. But, that's kind of like an element of horror, and so that's something that's done really well, is to leave it mysterious for as long as possible because you do want to keep that horror element in the mix. So that's something that's really good, and I enjoyed that.
And I say it on every video, but the best X-Files episodes leaves you with more questions than answers. Mm-hmm. And this one may be the most guilty of that praise. Because there are so many questions after this specific episode. It takes you a good 20 minutes of pondering after the fact to connect the dots in Krychek's ridiculous plan. And it is a ridiculous plan. There are far easier ways to do what he was doing. I'm still... He brought Mulder to Russia to torture him, or some sort of psychosexual notion? But also, you come to learn a little bit more about Krychek and how he, secretly wants Mulder to win. That if Krychek had to choose a side, if power wasn't involved, he would not want the Syndicate to win. That's about it. What did you think of Dana Scully in these two episodes? Because she was not in Russia. She had to play almost the boring paperwork equivalent of it.
Yeah, she did. And that, I don't know, she did take a back role this time, right, instead of a front role. But I think she added to it because she kept the tension and the suspension. Right, and so that was very important, especially when it comes to horror elements, because you don't want to relieve, you want to build tension.
And it's also order and chaos. Chaos
all over again,
being Mulder on his crazy adventure, and order being Scully almost going against the system itself in a courtroom.
Yeah,
almost a courtroom drama.
Yeah. And then there was also the fact that Mulder just shows up at just the right time from Russia to the United States and Washington, D.C.
Chris Carter is so tongue-in-cheek that, it's not even a question of, everybody's wondering, well, how did he get there? Last time we saw him, he was in some Russian peasant's house. How did he get there?
Yeah.
And then Skinner goes, story for another time. which is a nice tongue-in-cheek little jab from Chris Carter himself, I'm sure. And this is another episode. There are plenty where I would call Mulder one of the worst partners in the entire world. What do you think?
Was one of the what?
Worst partners you could ask for.
I mean, yeah, he's really bad.
And Dana was about to, like, throw away her career. She went to jail over protecting him.
And then she was like, you know, about to be accused with perjury, and all these crimes are going to be put to her name. Oh, dang, that's really bad.
And Mulder shows up with a smile and a scratch on his head.
Yeah, right.
Here to save the day, babe.
It did have that heroic kind of quality.
My favorite line, I do believe, is an ad-lib line. It was in the first part where Mulder is manhandling Alex Krycek, and it has to be ad-libbed. It has to be improv. But he pushes him and goes, "Stupid ass haircut." And that is just, I don't know, that is just hilarious and just silly. There were a lot of silly Mulder moments in the first episode, calling Krycek Charlie Brown and stuff like that. Oh, God. And Krycek, this is really the episode that solidifies the lone wolf symbolism that aligns his character so well. Before you see Krycek, like moments before, there is a stray wild dog captured in the center of the frame on a street. And that signals in the entrance of Krycek, who we haven't seen for about a year's worth of time, because he hadn't appeared since Apocrypha. Last time we saw him, he was in a missile silo in North Dakota. Mm-hmm. And now we're aligning him directly with stray dog, at least stray dog symbolism, if not lone wolf. Maybe a dog who wishes he was a wolf. I would be able to argue about that one. But even when Mulder is taking him around to go interrogate people, he leaves him in the car. He puts down the window for him as if he were an animal and says lines like, "I'll get you a bowl of water, Krycek." He is treated exactly like a dog. But the whole idea is, if you back a dog into a corner, it will bite you wherever it can. And that's one of the interesting things about the X-Files, because the X-Files has some great villains, Alex Krycek being one of my favorite villains of all time, but you also have the cigarette-smoking man, the well-manicured man, and the well-dressed man, even the bounty hunter. The best villains are actually acting out of fear, out of an instinct for survival. All of them.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking so as well, because if we were to go forward with the idea that there is this invading alien species, then the Syndicate would be that group that's still trying to oppose them, but knows that it's not really possible to stop it.
But at least trying to secure a future for themselves and for the people that they know personally, things like that. At least for some of the people they deem important enough.
Right, and so this is what's interesting about this, is because it ties back into your mentioning of the Operation Paperclip problem. And then that actually ties into real-life historical lore. And I know that since the X-Files does place this in this sort of time period, then I know that that Chris Carter was doing this on purpose to say something about these particular events within history. Particularly within Operation Paperclip, I know that German scientists from Nazi Germany, after the World War in 1945, in 1946, they started taking Nazi scientists in and using it as fuel to aid in the space race against Russia, basically. And that's like the whole of Operation Paperclip.
Oh my God, this is almost like an inoculation race.
Yeah, and this was interesting. So watch this.
Wow, cool.
Yeah, so then you have the Russian equivalent of Operation Paperclip, which is Operation Osovakin, which is basically an even more aggressive Operation Paperclip, where they also recruit German Nazi scientists to aid in the space race. So these two things are happening in parallel, and Chris Carter knows this, and he's trying to expose these projects by our governments. And that's pretty cool.
That actually makes the episodes a lot more brilliant. With so many more, like, possible symbolic meanings to each character now, metaphorically. Krycek being the double agent, too.
Yeah, and a lot of it was specifically for aiding military research.
Absolutely.
So the only thing that's really convoluted here is the alien extraterrestrial dynamic, right? If you believe in aliens, it wouldn't be convoluted at all. It would actually be very truthful, right?
Right.
So, but that's the thing, and I think Chris Carter does the alien little shift on purpose, because he's actually he's trying to make it or at least from what I can see and the feeling and impression I'm getting, is he's trying to make it out that you would have to be kind of an alien in order to want to experiment on humans.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
that's the impression overall I get from Chris Carter and what he's trying to craft in his narrative here. And he's trying to say that, you know, you shouldn't want to be like this, or shouldn't even want to be involved, really. So you should want to be on the side of Dana Scully and Fox Mulder and stopping this Operation Paperclip or Operation Osavakim or whatever.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So that's really interesting, and how dark history is. Interesting, obviously not a good interesting, kind of like a grim thing, but it's still truthful to know.
What did you get from the way our villains acted in this one? Cigarette Smoking Man and Krychek and the not necessarily the old Russian assassin. He was just apparently he was just an extension of Krychek. He was the arm that he lost, essentially.
Yeah, that was definitely a powerful metaphor there. I was interested by like they were making a lot more moves, and they were saying everything was going in the right direction as well. So that was actually a little more foreboding, and also a little more sinister, really. And so they did a good job in that regard, and you know, kept me thinking, you know, like what's going to be the response from the FBI? What's going to be the response from the people who are upholding justice? What are they going to try and do in response to that? And so that's something that I would like to see, because, you know, the idea of justice is being toyed around with, again, in the juxtaposition of order and chaos. So we do have this juxtaposition of, you know, this orderly justice that Dana Scully is trying to uphold, and she's trying to, and I think that's where Fox Mulder, and getting back to your previous question about the court and that whole scenario is concerned, I was just getting at the fact that she, you know, I agree with her. I agree with her idea that she should, and the whole of a system or a rule of law should want to uphold people accountable.
Yes.
And if that's what Chris Carter's saying, I agree with it.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it even goes to the metaphor as well when she's talking about how you're going after the wrong people. The people you should be going after are walking around basically with immunity, right?
And right after she says that, and Fox Mulder walks in, we see the cigarette smoking man in the background.
Yeah, he was there the whole time watching over it, and that's the person you should be going after, but you never will.
Yep, because he's in the back of the courtroom and is hiding in plain sight.
Because if we learned anything from Apocrypha and from Piper Maru, we learned that we bury the dead alive, and that there's always justice, but it's not the kind that we want it to be.
Yeah, I can see that too. And part of the reason why is I think Chris Carter's a pretty smart cat, and he knows a lot about like history, especially when it comes to shadow governments and also like shadowy organizations and their particular operation schematics. So, for example, if we were to reference a historical example, you have Niccolo Machiavelli's The Prince, where Machiavelli is really just making fun of the Medici family in Florence, Italy, in the 1500s. And he's basically saying, you know, this is actually how the prince in the Medici family thinks. He thinks like this. This is ridiculous. And, you know, there's a mixed review. Like, some people thought that Machiavelli was supporting this idea that there should be this kind of rule of law where, you know, it's basically a power struggle and you have to, you know, cutthroat your way to the top. That's not what he was saying, obviously. He was a republic, pro-republics, pro-for the people, and he was, in fact, imprisoned by the Medici family specifically because he wrote The Prince, and they didn't like that. But, you know, some of the more intelligent members of the Italian society in that time period were well aware of this. And so I think that's what Chris Carter is doing here in the X-Files with the Syndicate. He's kind of doing the same maneuver. He's saying, hey, this is the Syndicate. You be able to say, hey, they have this kind of idea to save the human race, but, you know, you're kind of crippling yourself at the same time. You're not giving yourself a fighting chance. So why are you aiding and abetting these aliens from invading, right? And that's what doesn't make sense, right? Because if you really look at it in the whole ethos of our history, and you were to like read up even more on Machiavelli, and I get that the term Machiavelli now is associated with manipulative, but that's not the case of who Machiavelli was. He was a good person. He wasn't a manipulator, right? The Medici family were manipulators. And I think that Chris Carter here is bringing that same problem into the foray into a modern perspective. And what he's doing is he's saying that this syndicate is wrong because they're wrong in the same way that the Medici family is wrong.
Yeah.
And that they are trying to, uphold their own interests, and at the same time, because they're upholding their own interests, they're actually causing more problems than they are solving problems. And so the syndicate has the same problem here, is they're trying to stop this alien invasion, but actually it's getting worse.
No, absolutely. I think that's exactly what he's saying with it.
Mm-hmm. And so that's interesting.
And some of those questions you have are, some of them are answered later on. X-Files is not a show that goes out of its way to answer questions. It's a show that goes out of the way to make you ask them. But it does answer a few of the important ones that you were asking, most certainly. We learn a lot more about the cigarette-smoking man and how this whole thing got started, really.
Yeah, that's something that would be interesting. I wonder if they would be like... Because the aliens must have started coming after World War II, right? Which would mean that maybe radio waves, or maybe it's before. I don't know.
I'll show you a few episodes. I'll show you a few.
Yeah.
You got anything else? Yeah. That's a video for another time. We can do a whole video on the flashback scenes from these shows and form a bit of a narrative from that. Anything else to say about these particular episodes?
There's just one I really enjoyed. Just wanted to take a step back and talk about like the cinematic experience of it. Mm-hmm. So this one was a little more fast-paced and a lot more full of action. There's like at least one explosion.
Yeah, there's car chases. There's heart. I do love the ending of Tunguska. It's one of the most horrifying endings of an X-Files episode I've ever seen, with the torture scene where Mulder, he can't really turn his head because it's held down by this wiring, and he can hear as the black oil is pouring on all these other men's faces or in the same position as him, and you can hear, all these men screaming as it gets closer and closer to him, and I'm like, oh, that's so well done. That's so nice. And then Mark Snow, the composer, had a lot of fun scoring that scene. He makes it so, like, universal horror gothic.
And it's so very eerie and creepy and unsettling, to say the least.
These episodes are always really well done. They go above and beyond. It's not a Law and Order. There's no, like, stationary camera. The show, the filmmakers, the people who put together the visuals will go above and beyond for really no other reason than to actually make it better, make it a show of quality.
Yeah.
If they can move it on a dolly, they'll move it on a dolly. You will hardly see a stationary shot with the cameras, like, not moving or not trying to express something interesting. And that's one of the reasons why the X-Files is so great, because it's just a show of top quality.
Yeah. And let's not forget that Mulder is now infected, and who knows?
Well, oh fuck. They didn't explain that.
Yeah.
They didn't
They just left it on a cliffhanger, and he's still the hero, and so now I'm like with mixed feelings about Mulder's character.
Well, he was experimented on. Oh shit!
But you saw the little things enter his fucking eyes.
But they must have left, and if you cut off your arm, then they don't experiment anymore, and you don't have it.
But he didn't get his arm cut off. Not Mulder.
He said there's another way, right?
He did, but you never explained it, so...
In the words of Skinner, it's a video for another time. Thank you guys for watching. As you see, we ended this video just as clueless as we were going into it. And that's what's brilliant about it. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you guys have been enjoying these videos, because we really enjoy making them. Stay tuned for more like them.